Why have First Amendment rights been viewed as essential to the functioning of a free society? In what ways have these rights been of particular importance to women and minorities? And then lastly, although First Amendment rights are considered essential in a constitutional democracy, it is sometimes argued that these rights must be limited. Under what circumstances, if any, do you think limitations are justified? Explain your answer.
The framers knew that free speech is the friend of change and revolution, but they also knew that it is always the deadliest enemy of tyranny. So said Justice Hugo Black in his dissent to the 1957 decision of Yates v. United States, in which the Supreme Court affirmed the convictions of communists accused of advocating the overthrow of government. Expressing skepticism towards the majority's holding, Justice Black insisted that free expression of unpopular ideas is absolutely vital to the peaceful progress of a free society.
Therefore, the 5 freedoms, speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition, given to us in the First Amendment, work together to preserve each individual's fundamental right to contribute to the marketplace of ideas, to peacefully assemble and make progress towards a more perfect union. The founders considered the freedom of expression not only essential for a functioning free society, but as the keystone of freedom. The suppression of expression often yields violent uprisings, such as when lawyer and politician Maximilien Robespierre started his reign of terror during the French Revolution and killed anybody who he believed was against his uprising.
In order for the citizens to have a peaceful way to express their discontent with the government, the Founding Fathers created the First Amendment. The freedom of expression bypasses the need for violence by the disenfranchised seeking equality. Invoking free exercise of religion and assembly, Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights activists were able to congregate in churches on their quest for equality. In 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference gathered the African American community in the 16th Street Baptist Church to peacefully protest the segregation in Birmingham, Alabama during the Children's Crusade.
Applying First Amendment protections, Cesar Chavez's use of aggressive, yet nonviolent techniques such as boycotts and hunger strikes led to grape growers recognizing the United Farm Workers Union, brought national attention to the plight of farm workers. Many women have gained a voice against inequalities that they have suffered in this country. By using the First Amendment right to petition and address grievances, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Convention in New York created a blueprint for the women's rights and suffrage movements. This ultimately led to the passing of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote.
Freedom of expression not only allows change through persuasion rather than violence, but it is key in the progression of a society and equality for its individuals, especially those who are underrepresented in government, such as minorities and women. Although Justice Black believed that the freedom of speech and expression should be absolute, we agree with the Supreme Court, which has ruled otherwise, by repeatedly ruling that state and federal governments may place reasonable restrictions on the time, place, and manner of individual expression.
In order to be considered constitutional, these restrictions must be content neutral, be narrowly defined, have a significant government interest, and leave open alternative channels of communication. These restrictions were first established in the 1941 case Cox v. New Hampshire, where a group of Jehovah's Witnesses were denied their right to freely assemble and exercise their religion because their march along the city sidewalks interfered with normal foot travel, upholding a compelling state interest to enforce regulations that assure the safety and convenience of the people.
The court held that the power of the government is needed to safeguard the social order upon which civil liberties ultimately depend. Other forms of expression are not protected by the First Amendment, such as allowing the use of defamation, slander, or obscenity. Also, as ruled upon in Bredin v. Ohio, encouraging eminent illegal action not only infringes upon the rights of other people, but encourages violence and rioting.
Since August of this year, media coverage of Michael Brown's shooting by police officer Darren Wilson began to incite rioting and violence in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. In order to protect their citizens and prevent further damage to the community, the press's access was limited. First Amendment rights must occasionally be limited in order to protect the common good over the necessity of the perceived individual rights. Thank you.
All righty. We have some follow-up questions. Jared?
How does freedom of expression contribute to individual liberty and the common good?
Well, a concept that's really important in American culture is enlightened self-interest, which is where by pursuing your own ideas and forms of expression, you further the good of everybody in that community.
And if you look back on Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez, they were expressing their individual ideas but yet their ideas contributed to the common good and led to more civil liberties to minorities.
Individual expression also can sometimes be controversial, such as recently LeBron James wearing a shirt, "I can't breathe." Although people don't always agree with this, it contributes to what the Supreme Court called the marketplace of ideas. They established this idea in Abrams v. United States, and it allows people to really think and decide for themselves what is right, and that allows for progress and for rights to evolve in a society.
And in the West Virginia Board of Education v. Barnett decision, Justice Robert H. Jackson said, "If there is one fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, shall prescribe what is orthodox in matters of politics, religion, or other matters of public opinion." So I really think that the purpose of the First Amendment is not to distinguish what is bad speech and good speech, but really to protect the speech that is unpopular.
Are there not accepted limitations, though, to the freedom of expression?
The limitations that aren't accepted are if you're limiting political speech. For example, Texas v. Johnson, Johnson burned a flag, and at first Texas had a state law that said you can't burn venerable objects, and obviously an American flag is a venerable object, but he was burning it in a political and symbolic way, so the Supreme Court said that you cannot punish him for that.
And when it interferes with the functions or the responsibilities of states, such as in Adderley v. Florida, when a group of protesters assembled on the driveway of a jail in Florida, the jail had to limit their ability to exercise this right because they couldn't properly function. The jail couldn't properly function with them in the driveway.
Another example of limitations on free speech that are somewhat accepted is that inside of a school, you do have less First Amendment rights than you usually would, with things such as dress codes, limits on obscene speech, etc., because it protects the safe learning environment.
And elaborating off of Maddie's point, in school, I think a lot of the court cases that come up, they really use the precedence of the court case Tinker v. Des Moines, which kind of said that these students were wearing black armbands to symbolize their discontent with the Vietnam War, and that should be protected because that is their own symbolic political speech. And it was not a substantial disruption to the learning environment, so it was protected.
In what ways does the First Amendment reflect the influence of the natural rights philosophy?
The natural rights philosophy was very much based on the individual versus classical republicanism, which was more for the common good. So natural rights with the First Amendment gives the individual more power to express their own views, to have their own beliefs and practice their religion how they'd like. And it definitely puts more of a focus on the individual than any group in particular.
And one of the leading natural rights philosophers was John Locke, and he really believed in the ideas of life, liberty, and property, and the Bill of Rights really protects people's life, liberty, and property.
Explain the difference between positive and negative rights. Which kind of rights does the First Amendment protect?
Positive rights ensure that government acts in a certain way, whereas negative rights restrict government from acting in a certain way. A great example of this would be the Sixth Amendment, which ensures the government giving due process in trial, or speedy trial to its citizens. And a great example of a negative right would be the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law, which restricts them from making laws.
And this also goes off of your last question, whether it's individual or classical Republican or individual rights. So the First Amendment is much more of an individual right thing than giving government more power. They're limiting the government's power so that we as people have more power and control.
The First Amendment is stated in absolute terms. Congress shall make no laws respecting the establishment of religion. Does that wording somehow reflect a hostility towards religion? If so, why? If not, why?
Actually, when the First Amendment was created, it was more to protect the churches from the states, because we talk about the wall of separation between church and state. And so it was decided that in order to have a fully functioning free society, we needed to keep churches, religion and government separate, so neither would be excessively entangled with another.
I would say it doesn't have a hostility essay. It really promotes the idea that because they can't establish a church enforced upon us that we have to practice this religion, it gives us the individual freedom to choose what we believe in, and by that it really allows us to decide for ourselves and able to practice individually. So it's not a hostility, but rather the exact opposite.
And I think that all these different religions, people having the freedom to exercise their own religion really adds to that whole concept of the marketplace of ideas, meaning that if people have different opinions, you can kind of go off each other's opinions and progress society forward.
Yeah, so if the government forced us to all have the same religion, then we wouldn't really be able to learn from one another's different ideas about whatever religion should be. It's all just sort of the same idea, and we don't expand and we don't grow from that.
Should we have in God You Trust on our coins and currency?
In God We Trust was placed on our nation's coins starting back in the Civil War when there was increased religious sentiment in the North, when we believed that we were fighting for a real moral cause. And it was decided that the nation's motto should really be on our money. And so I think there's a valid secular purpose for that. It talks about like how strong the belief was in our country and the protections of it.
Elaborating off of Maddie's point, I think what you really need to use for this is the Lemon test established in Kurtz v. Lemon. The first prong would be that there would be no, excuse me, that there would have to be a valid secular purpose. The second prong would be that the government is not advancing one religion over the other, and then the third prong would be that there was no excessive entanglement with the government.
Does that same analysis go true for the pledge?
Absolutely, it goes true with the pledge because there is a valid secular reason for why we have under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. It was put in there during the Cold War, and it was sort of used as a motivational tool to fight the so-called godless communists. So there's a motivational tool in there, so there's a valid secular reason.
But kind of going off of Eric there, in the West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett decision, it was decided that students do not have to stand and recite the pledge if they choose not to.
Going to something of a more recent topic, how does your group or you individually feel about the First Amendment's application to the recent CIA reports and the rebuttal reports thereafter?
I think that we can really compare this case to the case in New York Times v. U.S. So in the New York Times v. U.S. case, the government could not punish the press for what the information that they released, but they can hold someone in contempt to try to get their source released. But I think it's really important that the government does not limit the press in that way, in such as the CIA case and in New York Times v. U.S., because if they did, it would create sort of a chilling effect. So if people, they would be afraid next time that they would be punished for their actions for releasing certain information to the public.
What if it's highly sensitive information? Classified information?
WikiLeaks.
There's arguments on both sides of the WikiLeaks case. One is that it was good for the public to learn about all of these things because our government wasn't being quite transparent. But on the other hand, it is a threat to national security that somebody with that kind of access to information was able to release these documents without releasing their source.
In Nebraska, Press Association v. Stewart, they ruled that sometimes the press should not be able to release private documents such as these because then it creates problems with national security, and it puts the whole common good and the whole nation at risk. So there are times where we would have to limit these.
And if you are releasing sensitive information, you could be creating either a clear or present danger, which is not protected under Schenck v. US, or you could be creating imminent lawless action, which is also not protected under Brandenburg